it's like a $50 per sow per year benefit if you're able to detect lameness early. And that's been studied, and the study's been published. So it's an established benefit, right? We know that we can detect lameness 5 to 6 weeks early without added labor.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Wisenetix Podcast. I'm very happy and glad to have you all here with us, learning more about agriculture and what's going on in the industry. Today, our guest speaker is Amos Petersen. Amos is founder and CEO of FarrPro, and he's going to be sharing more about his experience in the industry, about technology, and lots of cool stuff. Welcome, Amos.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Amos, we like to start our conversations learning a little bit more about our guest speakers. So if you could introduce yourself and share a little bit about your story.
So I grew up on a farm, actually several farms in the West and then in the Midwest. And, I've always been interested in computers and technology. Those two things didn't always coincide for me. So, I had to explore the tech part on my own, but I'm familiar with a lot of the difficulties that small farms have in raising animals, especially. My parents raised I think every kind of animal they could try their hand at. And, somewhere along the way, I got interested in the pork industry specifically. And I saw some opportunities that I thought we could take advantage of, make life easier for farmers and produce better livestock, increase productivity, and took advantage of that and started this company. Before that, I was into wireless throughput. I had a company that delivered internet access to rural locations, and before that, I'd actually done a tour through a program called Willing Workers on Organic Farms, where you're able to hitchhike around Europe or other countries and experience the way they do things, and you get room and board in exchange. So I did that for a couple of years. That also kind of formed the way I think about things now. So that's the short version. But I've been working with. I've been heading FarrPro for 7 years now, and we've built some really interesting technology, and we're excited to see where it goes from here.
That's great. Amos, so you grew up in a farm, in different farms actually. So your family, has this root within agriculture, and you also have this, taste for technology. How would your parents, looking at what you do today, how would they describe what you do?
I think they've learned not to ask. I tell, I'm an oversharer every time I talk to. I know they know that we work in animal behavior systems, right? But yeah, it started out in a different place. So where we started was in the direct application of supplemental heat for piglets, right? So it's a little bit easier to understand, and it's definitely still a need. And that technology forked off into our graphene map product, and then into the Sentry system, which is our main focus today. And that's a little bit, it's a little bit abstruse, I would say, for people who don't use it or don't understand, the workings behind it. But they know I work in AI, and they know that I keep pigs healthy.
No, that's kind of somehow accurate. But yeah, I love how parents and older people used to describe. My background is in communication, so my whole life was built around computers, because that's how you do communication today. It's the main tool you use to do basically anything. And the way people would describe anyone that worked with a computer is, yeah, he works with computer stuff. So it's nice to see
He's
that.
A computer guy.
Yeah, computer guy. So they would call me for any sort of issues. They would have I mean, he works with computer. He should be able to fix it. So
Yeah, that is funny. Yeah, like even when I was doing that woofing tour in Europe, and I ended up, half the time I was also just the guy that fixed the computer of whoever I was staying with. So I actually had more computer work there than just about anything. So.
well, I'm still the computer guy for my fiance. She's a gynecologist, but yeah, every time she struggles with anything, I try to tell her, yeah, check on Google, you might find the answer. But at the end,
Did you turn it off and turn it back on again?
yeah, at the end, I check it on Google, and yeah. So, but Amos, let's approach a little bit more, your background and also the work you guys are doing at FarrPro. So how this background on growing up on a farm and then having this taste for technology. I'm not sure if taste is the best word, but being into technology, how that influenced your understanding of the technology in agriculture and also the needs of farmers or pig farmers more specifically. And in addition to that, also if you could give us a brief introduction on the services you guys do, which sort of solutions you provide to the industry with FarrPro.
When I got my introduction to computers, it was the early '90s. So they were useful, but there was a lot of doubt about how they could be useful in different applications, right? And I think even my dad told me one time that he didn't think anybody would ever make money with computers. That was when I saved up money, and I took out a loan for I built my first computer, but the first decent machine actually I had to take out a loan for. It was like $3,000, in the '90s, and I had to go to the bank and get a loan for it. But I was dedicated to the idea that we could use these machines to help ourselves do just about anything, right? If you wrote the right application, if you had the right application for them, and early on, it's like spreadsheets, helping my dad with his business. But, at some point, I don't think it was in the '90s, but, maybe in the last 20 years, we've been able to gather data and analyze it and support decisions in any industry. It just hasn't been taken up as readily and there are some exceptions in agriculture. The dairy industry is tech fortified, I'd say. They have robot milkers and carousels that are run, autonomously, nearly autonomously. But certain segments of agriculture, like the pork industry, even in 2016, 2017, when I started FarrPro, they just hadn't come along, right? People use pen and paper to record data, and it just sits in a filing cabinet somewhere, dirty filing cabinet. Somebody might type the numbers into a spreadsheet for internal use, but we're not closing the feedback loop like we could. And I saw early on that if there was a remote monitoring solution that we'd lose fewer pigs. I know there were many nights when my mom or my dad would go out and check on the animals, and they'd be like they'd be trying to resuscitate animals in the bathtub, and winters in Iowa are pretty harsh. So if you could monitor the animals remotely, understand that they're in trouble before they're in trouble, there were opportunities to increase productivity and do better by the animals, right? So that definitely informed my my outlook from an early age. Although in the beginning, I wasn't very interested in farming because I saw it as difficult, and I was more interested in just what I could do with computers. I started a company when I was like 14 or 15 with a friend, and we made stupid games and screensavers and things like that. But those verticals are very well supplied, and agriculture there aren't a lot of folks in technology that have an understanding of the needs of the end user in agriculture. I mean, like row crops aside, we've had tech in tractors and farm machinery that's related to row crops for quite a while, but animal ag, is still kind of lagged.
Well, you basically gave the introduction. So what exactly you guys do at FarrPro and, how you guys are helping the industry?
We've taken the approach that there's a traditional form of healthcare, of animal healthcare, that's more reactive, right? And you might call that the analog model, where you determine that the animal's sick or might be sick, and you supply a vaccine or some pharmaceutical, some therapeutic that allows the animal to recover from poor health, right? But ideally, you'd keep the animal from going lame or getting sick in the first place, right? The challenge is that, at least in the pork industry, you have a labor challenge. So you don't have the number of people necessary to monitor large groups of animals all the time. I think, you have an average of, I can't remember what the number is, but just a few seconds of eyeball time on an animal, every day, maybe. And that's not enough time for even a trained herdsman to make a good assessment of the animal's current health. And, we have sow cards, we have techniques that we use to monitor the animals in this analog way. But the far better way to do it is to allow a passive system to take up the data 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, analyze it, and assess the animal and predict whether or not that animal is likely to become lame, right? Traditional animal health companies, their business model is curative, right? So, you're supplying something that recovers the animal from ill health. And by far the most economical way to manage animal health is preventative. So our Sentry system does exactly that. It replaces the ear tag that an animal wears for inventory control with a tiny computer that has a set of sensors inside it. It's like a Fitbit, a health tracker for the animal. So, it's constantly taking the assessment of the animal, their body temperature, the ambient temperature where the animal is, and almost in real time, 25 samples per second, showing the behavior of the animal. If it's coughing, sitting, standing, lying, eating, drinking, any number of micro behaviors can be determined just from this tracker. And then those are used to comprise what we would say a health status, right? If there's a high chance that the animal is lame, we can detect lameness something like 5 to 6 weeks before the average person can, right? So by the time a person detects that an animal is lame, that a sow is lame in this case, the sow's in bad shape. Sows are able to, they're prey animals, so they don't want to be seen as injured. So when a person is in the room, they buck up and they try to present themselves as healthy. But when no one's around, you see that they're lying more, something that might be indicative of an injury. And we can detect that far earlier than a person can to give a better outcome to recovering that animal to health. So there's that. And then also our system is a task management system as well. So that labor piece is essential, but it's also just as essential not to have just bodies, but trained professionals that are good at what they do. And when you're able to monitor the impact of an individual on the health of your herd, you can promote that person, you can give them a raise, you can, do whatever you can to retain that person in their position. And it also gives an impetus for that person to do their job well, right? So, it's kind of closing that feedback loop entirely between inputs and outputs, health management, health outcomes of the animals that makes this system special.
That's pretty awesome. Is it fair to say that just in terms of an analogy, for example, those rings where you can measure your own KPIs, health KPIs, and keep track of your health in some sort of level similar to that, and also contributing in terms of data and okay, that's awesome. That's pretty nice. And earlier, when you were introducing yourself, you also mentioned that one of your previous experiences was touring around Europe in European farms. How do you think this experience influenced your approach today? What were the main differences you noticed between their farming and our farming, and also, how that inspired you to try to close the technological gap in the U.S. pork industry?
Well, I think it was an early glimpse at what could be done. And I was touring organic farms, right? So these are smallholder farms, but even those small farms were doing things in a different way. You have to remember that, back when I was doing this tour back in the 2000s, it was more like, and I mean, even today, small farms, large farms, they all use the same technologies. They have heat lamps to keep the piglets warm. They have crates or stalls to keep the sows, from crushing the piglets and to isolate them. But, their setup, they were trying things that seemed more, oh gosh, how would you say it? More in line with what an animal that was evolved along a certain pathway would expect from its environment, right? So in Scandinavia, and even in commercial farms in Scandinavia, they use straw for bedding. They'll still use straw for bedding. And they have, different housing solutions. Because when a sow is ready to farrow, she'll build a nest in the wild, right? And usually they'll build a nest out of leaves and twigs and things. But that provides some protection for the sow and also for the piglets. The piglets, they'll burrow in the nest and they'll have access to the sow, for nourishment and when they're nursing. And then they'll also be able to keep warm in that nest and stay protected. They'll make little burrows. Well, the sows that we have, sure, the genetics are different than they have been over the last few centuries, but they still have these instincts and these behaviors that don't find expression in more conventional housing methods. So it was more of a realization that we can work. If you're thinking about it from a systems engineering point of view, you can work to make the environment for the animal work for the animal and the farmer at the same time. There are just a few things that a few gulfs that you have to bridge before you get there. And technology can supply the material for that bridge, right? So it just got me thinking, the Haven, which was our first product, was built largely based on this concept that the piglets needed a place to shelter, like an incubator, to keep them safe and healthy and warm for the critical first few days of life, right? And then putting a monitoring system in that incubator into the Haven was the next step for us.
That's awesome. And it actually, this first two answers, you kind of answered future questions I had, about like the gaps you guys are closing, specifically in farrowing, and also, the different perspective you have in terms of the traditional health and the preventive health you're proposing with FarrPro and your solutions, which is pretty similar to us humans. Of course, we have the medications, we have our vaccines and everything, but well, if you believe in the 21st century should know that you should be exercising, taking care of your nutrition and other things to make sure that you don't need those medications.
Definitely. And, I'd actually offer as well, this is an interesting way to think about it, but when you go to the doctor, right, the doctor asks you a series of questions. In fact, at your intake, you're supposed to answer a series of questions. At least in the United States, that's what we do. Animals don't have the ability to speak, right? So you're really starting from just what you can observe, and it's a very limited number of observations you can make per animal. So, I think about systems like the Sentry system as a way to let the animals speak, right? So, they can sort of with their actions tell you what's happening with them, so that you can address the issues as they are.
Perfect. And so you also mentioned ag, depending on the segment we're talking about, it can be less, influenced by technology, especially in the big market if we compare it to dairy, for example. So it's more traditional industry, let's say. Which sort of barriers did you encounter, trying to introduce new technologies into this traditional farming, and how you overcame them, or how are you trying to overcome them?
There are always barriers in any industry to new technology. I mean, that's why we have the technology adoption curve, taught in business school, right? I think in a conservative industry like the pork industry or animal agriculture in general, there's a lot of tradition, right? Like you're doing something the way that you've learned to do it. Maybe you've learned it from your parents and they learned it from their parents. So there's a bit of inertia, right? Delivering obvious value to the customer is the way that you overcome that, right? So you've got to tie it into a real monetary benefit. I mean, we love. Nobody wants their animals. Every farmer wants their animals to have the best care that they can provide, right? But investing in a technology like the Sentry system, or any technology that's kind of outside the realm of what's traditionally been offered, it's a commitment. So, for instance, like our anchor value proposition for the Sentry system is lameness prevention, right? I mean, it can do so much more than that, but lameness has been studied and shown to affect farms at the rate of something like it's like a $50 per sow per year benefit if you're able to detect lameness early, and that's been studied, and the study's been published. So it's an established benefit, right? We know that we can detect lameness 5 to 6 weeks early without added labor. The study that I'm referring to is out of Iowa State, and they found that with an additional 2 employees, you can enact a protocol to detect lameness early and prevent lameness from getting bad, and that was worth $50 per sow per year. Well, with our system, you don't need those extra employees. You can do that passively. And that's, so anchoring the system back to a core value proposition is really how you overcome that. And then, we have a subscription model. So we're not asking farmers to invest a lot in a capital project, but $1.50 per animal per month, and we've split the benefit of that early lameness detection, like 2/3 to the farmer, 1/3 to our company. So, just making it easy for them to say yes, and then getting in there to prove that you're able to deliver real value with on a real concern, and then everything else is just gravy, right? So you need that core, that anchor value proposition to get past the post.
Your solutions, they rely a lot on data and AI, right? how do you see specifically artificial intelligence, and of course taking into consideration FarrPro, but also other possible solutions to the industry? How do you see AI and data playing a role in this industry?
I see AI and data playing a role in a different way than most people would see it, right? The role I see for generative AI is more of behaving like an intermediation layer. I mean, everybody understands that creating models that are able to select features that we might not be looking for is a great application for AI machine learning. But what really excites me is the ability to transform communication between all layers in production, right? So, for instance, you have a frontline worker. They speak Spanish. Maybe maybe they don't have a high level of education, but they're good workers, right? You have in this production company, you've got SOPs, policies, protocol that they need to be able to enact, right? And training is, maybe it's like a few days, grab the pressure washer and learn from the people around you, right? But if you're able to take the communications between the frontline workers, the supervisor, the manager, the vet, whatever stakeholders are there, and adapt that to the understanding level of those different layers, then you're kind of greasing the wheels, right? Like you're taking away maybe 80-90% of the miscommunication, the stumbling blocks that would be preventing you from really seeing what this worker can do or what your policies might be able to do. If you're enacting a plan to, I don't know, like say early detection of lameness or something like that. One of the barriers, in fact, any introduction of new technology or policy from management is always going to get a little bit of pushback from the front line, right? I mean, maybe they don't understand it. Maybe they're just used to doing it the way they're used to doing it. But overcoming that, we'll call it cultural barrier, is very important for being reactive and adapting to changing environments in the changing market. So I think, and on top of that, so there's the intermediation layer, and then the ability to pull out structured data from an unstructured conversation. Okay? So you and I are talking. If there was an LLM in the middle, or watching us, listening to our conversation, we could pull out aspects related to, I don't know, who I am as a person, right? Save those in a structured manner and create a profile of, really who I am. You can do that with anything. So, say you're experiencing a repeated, problem keeps coming up in the day-to-day from the front line. Well, those conversations can be combed through, and those issues can be pulled out and identified for follow-up, right? During it, through an automated process. And then you don't have I'll call it an ego problem. You don't have the very human problem of, say, being the bearer of bad news or some, what I'm talking about? Like if you're a supervisor and you're seeing things that maybe you think should be done a certain way, there's always something at stake when you bring that up to management, right? And so, taking the human fallibility and ego out of the assessment is important. So I see that as a real driving value in the future, especially in generative AI. Of course, we use AI for analysis, but it's really that generative piece that's going to be important very soon. Already is, but that's what we're working on.
Perfect. Yeah, even now, of course, in a different scenario, but here, people working online, most of meetings we did today, you have those transcriptions, and which are in some sort of way, listening to us and pinpointing the most important things that we need to follow up with, next steps, and summarizing that information in a clear way for both sides. So yeah, that's awesome. probably in the future we'll all have some microphones. Well, we do have some microphones already in our pocket, so and they're probably listening to us right now to to share relevant advertising with us when they join social media. So
Every time I talk about a vacation, I start getting like, cruise ads, and
it's incredible how it happens. It's incredible.
people say that they're not listening to you, but
Yeah, right. Well, it's someplace in very small letters that they probably are saying that they are, or they're not even saying, but yeah. And you brought this thing about data. So one thing that I try to think about, data is really valuable, right? But this data needs to be good data, validated. You want to make sure you have good data, right? How do you ensure that information generated and used by large language models, are validated, are trusted?
that's a great question. It's all about getting back to the ground truth, right? So if you think about if you have an objective perspective model, right, which is something that like we've been working on in various forms for the last few years, but you always need to anchor that to the source of the information so that you can standardize away from it, right? So, and that's with like any AI model, even so you have a vision AI model that's monitoring a pen full of animals. Well, you have to know like the boundaries of the pen. You have to understand like where the shadows are. I mean, AI neural nets do this, behind the scenes, right? But if you're training a model and you're picking out features, the traditional way is to just score, is to watch the video, right, and say this is happening and this is what it looks like. Well, that same philosophy can be applied to anything. So, like, let's say you're talking to, I don't know, somebody in the field, and they're giving you an answer in their communication style, right? They have a history of communicating. They have personal history, structured data about them that you can use to understand. I wouldn't say the true meaning, but you can like standardize that understanding around who that person is, what the source of that data is. It's like that in any model. Like get a more objective perspective on the information, on the data. And that's just, if you apply that philosophy to any data set, you're going to get a better result when you use that data set to make predictions or analysis.
As we're getting to the end of our conversation here, my wrap-up question about the business and technology is about what's coming up. What is the next big thing that you think it will happen in the industry when it comes to technology? I don't know if there's any possibility for us to see what comes after AI or data, but even taking into consideration those tools and technologies, what do you think is the next big thing in the industry? And are you guys doing anything to be prepared for it, to position to it?
Well, we do have some ideas. We're always working to obsolete ourselves, right? So if you're not working to kill the idea you had last year, then somebody else is. I think that passive understanding of animal behavior is really the holy grail. Right now we use a tracker, and it is applied exactly like you would apply an inventory tag, right? So it's not something that's noticeably different than what people are doing already, but they have batteries, right? They're computers, perhaps prone to error. And the holy grail, in my mind, is interreferential tracking of animals. Like, I'm not going to go into how we're addressing that necessarily, but for the moment, the industry is trying vision models, cameras, and they don't work. You will not get the ground truth from a vision model, right? I mean, we're biased because we use our eyes to see the world around us, but there are different frequencies, there are different methods, different parts of the spectrum that we can use to get better information about the animals that we're caring for. And I think that is the future, and it's something that we're developing here at FarrPro as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Basically, we are reproducing our system of perceiving the world to the machines, and there's probably other ways to do this. So
right, yeah, we definitely bring human biases to the data space.
okay, Amos. So my last question is not about business anymore, but some references of books, podcasts, documentaries, movies you've seen and you'd like to share with the audience.
I mean, it's a pretty standard book, for anyone who's trying to make changes in a transformative way, right? But I recommend The Innovator's Dilemma, to anybody who's interested in how, let's say, technological inertia works, or the seeds of the destruction of an old industry are always inherent in the success of the major players in that industry. It gives you a good perspective on how your ideas might perform in the broader industry when you're starting out, right? There's always this barrier to overcome, and it's a natural thing, especially if you're making change in a change adverse space, right? So Innovator's Dilemma is great. Podcasts, if for just the swine industry,
not even ag related things you like.
So for people who are interested in how AI is changing the way we use tools in development. Matthew Berman has a really good podcast, and I take a lot from folks that I follow in AI and sort of agentic development. It's really helped us. In fact, the folks that we train now, I just trained somebody this morning. The first thing we do is introduce them to AI coding tools, right? So it's more like a conversation with this agent than you just sitting down and hammering out code. And I strongly believe that unless you're in the top 20% of productive developers in the next couple of years, you're going to be doing something else, right? And the way to be that productive is to engage just prolifically, with whatever AI tools are at your disposal. So, Matthew Berman's a good one for that.
That's great. Amos, we came to the end of our conversation. I really appreciate all the insights you shared with us. Very interesting, like the perspective, not only about AI, but, how it's playing and its relation with data and how it can impact our days in agriculture. Well, last question is, where can our listeners find you online in case they want to connect?
Yeah, well, I'm on Twitter. We have a Facebook page, and you can always look me up. It's just Amos IP on Twitter. I don't even know my Twitter handle. You can email me directly. It's Amos at FarrPro if you have any questions or you're interested in continuing conversation about FarrPro.
That's perfect. Well, thank you, Amos, and thank you for everyone that is out there listening to us, to our content. We appreciate your company, and I hope to see you all in our next episode.